I just got a new partner a few days ago. It's like, what if I have two partners right now? I was surprised. Thank you. No, this is my mind. This is like, hey,
Right, good morning. It's nice to see you all. I'm sorry about Wednesday last week. My three kids have been sick for like 2 weeks. Like everyone I know is sick, and I feel like I've been doing, all right, as I back up as you walk by, I feel like I've been doing this for like 2 weeks with everybody that I know, just trying not to get it myself. But when they stay home, I have to stay home. So no, sorry about that. Hopefully I dodged it. I feel like it's been like coming slowly for 2 weeks. It's never gotten worse. So I don't know. We'll see. Why not? I hope you all had a nice weekend. I was saying to my class this morning, I feel like October is going too fast. Like I wanted to slow down. I need more candy eating time for October, right? So I wanted to slow down a little, but hopefully it will from here. But again, I hope everyone had a good weekend. We'll move forward. We're going out of order. So we're in chapter 3 and 7 is our next section. So communication and then love and intimacy. So kind of building on some of the topics that we talked about. We talked about different types of relationships and orientation. Now we'll talk a little bit about the importance of communication, a unit that is riddled with gender stereotypes. So we will definitely get into that a little bit. And then we'll move into love and intimacy from there. And I graded all of your submissions for the first homework assignment. If you didn't turn it in, you can still turn it in for half credit, which is better than nothing. So email it to me if you would still like to turn something in. Otherwise, I enjoyed all your field trips. A lot of you, several questionnaires for this one. Some people did condom shopping, a couple of birthday shopping ones, a couple of art projects. So really fun. Now you get to pick another one for the one that's due later in November. So you have one more to go. If you didn't go to a sex shop or something big and elaborate, start planning now, and hopefully you can do it for next time. Okay. So chapter 3, we're going to look at communication, which is a huge part of relationships, right? Friendships, relationships with family, romantic relationships. Communication is a big thing. We're going to talk about kind of gendered communication, mostly in this chapter, since we're in our human sexuality class. But communication is when you convey meaningful information to another person. Right? And we do that obviously through words, but we can also do that non-verbally as well. And a lot of our communication is very non-verbal, right? And that is when you communicate without words. So body language, touching, eye contact, lack of eye contact, all of those kind of things. It tends to fill in the gaps. And I always think that nonverbal communication is so fascinating. I think I shared once, I love people watching, right? Because you can pick up so much from nonverbal stuff, especially in relationships. Like, have you ever had somebody that you know and they're walking toward you and you can tell they're in a horrible mood? And they haven't even opened their mouth yet, right? You're like, oh God, here they come, right? Like you can see it. Like we met up with my in-laws last night and my father-in-law walked up all cranky like this and was like, oh great, like why'd we invite him? He was already in a bad mood, right? And we hadn't even started. Like you can tell a lot by the way that people communicate verbally, but also non-verbally. And communication tends to be a huge predictor of relationships. If you're not able to communicate well with a partner, right, that tends to be a big barrier to having that relationship last. A lot of research on this and research on common issues in relationships, which can be for heterosexual relationships or otherwise. Most of them are on heterosexual relationships, but we can obviously extend that. And as I was preparing this slide on nonverbal communication, I was looking for examples of nonverbal communication, and I kind of like had a hard time reining it in. So I'm sorry I have so many of them here. But look at like, you can see a huge difference, right? Like smiles are nonverbal, right? They look happy, they're touching, they're smiling versus like back-to-back arms crossed, like really obviously extreme difference. But crossing your arms can indicate like a lack of comfort, being closed off, being angry. They're not facing each other, right? And maybe they're fighting, right? Open, happy, like smiling, expressive versus like contempt, eye rolling is a big one we'll talk about when we get to contempt and like signs of negative communication. So eye rolling can be a big one. I found so many. I limited it to 2 slides though, right? In therapy, really interesting. I did couples therapy for I think I worked with like 6 or 7 couples when I was training to be a therapist. And the most interesting thing by far was where they would choose to sit in the room, right? Like, so you'd have a couch and you'd have chairs. Do they sit together on the couch or do they sit separately in chairs? Are they touching each other and close, or they have space in between each other and are closed off, right? You could tell right off the bat when a couple came in, kind of where they were at by how they sat, how close they sat, and their body language. Fascinating before they've even opened their mouth, right? And so I thought that was a good example of that. And then one last one, right? Like open and smiling and facing each other versus eye rolling and contempt. So again, we'll talk about like kind of positive indicators of communication and negative ones, but you can see a huge difference non-verbally in what these things are expressing just from body language alone. So a big part of this chapter is on something called like genderlect or gender differences in communication. And whether we want to accept it or not, and whether we accept the gender like binary of male, female or not, there are an incredible number of differences in the way that men and women stereotypically tend to communicate. And this can lead to a lot of issues in relationships. And it was so interesting. We were watching Wednesday as a family because my kids are obsessed with that and like Beetlejuice and everything at the moment. I think they just like Jenna Ortega, right? But there was a really great example in there of gendered communication between 2 characters, where one was saying one thing and one was saying like or receiving it in a different way. So I want to play this clip for you just to introduce this. And this is not an uncommon moment, right? Oh, I thought you were saying X when in reality you were saying something different. So let me play this short scene for you. I think it's a good in gendered communication. Like I was saying one thing and the other person receiving it in a completely different way. And that can be any kind of communication, but we see it a lot between like men and women, or people who are more like masculine in their communication style or feminine in their communication style. It's something that we have studied quite a bit. And as I mentioned, really riddled with stereotypes and overgeneralizations, but sometimes they hold true, right? It can be very common that these things hold true. And there's a couple of really like popular, or like I should say like popularized books about this. One of them, which is a little more clinical in nature, is called You Just Don't Understand Men and Women in Conversation by a person named Deborah Tannen. And the other one is Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. I'll pass these around in case you want to look at them. But they're like 2 of the most like maybe popular famous books about genderlect. Genderlect instead of like dialect. We're talking about differences between the ways that men and women communicate. And again, we're assuming like male, female here, and there are obviously issues with that. But you can think about it as like more masculine versus more feminine ways of communicating. And according to Deborah Tannen, the first author, who has a PhD, is a little bit more like academic in her book than the other. She talks about one big difference between men and women, that men tend to have what's called report talk, and women have what's called rapport talk. Rapport is all about your communication and your like connection with other people. That women, when they're communicating, are more focused on relationships and connections. Men are more focused on imparting knowledge, like a report of what happened, right? Like, so if you ask a woman what happened in her day, they're going to focus on like relationships and connection. Men more like a bulleted report. Again, stereotype, but it often holds true. She said that women are more likely than men to use tag questions, disclaimers, and hedge words in their communication. So a tag question is when you ask a question afterward, like it's really hot today, isn't it? Right? Like it's like a little tag. At the end of it, you ask something, right? Like this month is going really quickly, right? Like you're like asking for validation. That women are often asking for validation by adding a tag question or a disclaimer. I might be wrong, but, right? I'm not sure, but those are disclaimers, right? Like almost like you're undermining what you have to say beforehand because you don't want to assert yourself, which could be a threat to connection or rapport. Yeah.
I have a really good example of that exact thing in the seminars that we do in with my English professor.
Yeah.
We basically you get like 15-20 minutes to teach the class about something.
Okay.
That's how I describe it. But you can see almost every single girl in that class will start off the sentence with, I could be wrong, but.
Yeah.
And I'm like, bro,
Just say it.
just say the thing.
Yeah, it's really common because according to, again, we're in like the land of gender stereotypes here, but according to Tannen, if you assert yourself too strongly, it's a threat to connection with other people, right? And it's that like, I'm submissive, so I don't want to be wrong. So I could be wrong, but I'm not sure. But like, it's those little disclaimers and tag questions or hedge words, like kind of, sort of, maybe, you know, like those kind of things as well. So that women are much more likely to use some of these things, almost undermining what they're saying, because they don't want to be too dominant or have that like threat to connection. That women are more worried about community and men worried about context. And men are always trying to like up the other person and assert themselves and have that dominance, versus women being more focused on relationship and connection. Lots of other ideas in her book, but those are some of like the kind of big ones. And then how this could lead to issues in a relationship, right? Like as two people are communicating with each other. Now, the other book goes into that a little bit more. The Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, kind of using this analogy that men and women are literally from other planets, right? And that we have this sense of like, we have different communication styles because we come from different places. And then we forgot that we're supposed to be different. And I have this book on, I was gonna say on tape, on disc. And I want to play just the intro for you. It's like 2.5 minutes, but it describes the premise of the book. And I think it's kind of helpful in summarizing some of these ideas. So let me just play that little beginning part for you. Unless I got tired of waiting. There we go. Okay, so there's nothing to look at. It's just like 2.5 minutes introducing the book.
Harper Audio presents Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus by Dr. John Gray. Imagine that men are from Mars and women are from Venus. One day long ago, the Martians, looking through their telescopes, discovered the Venusians. Just glimpsing the Venusians awakened feelings they had never known. They fell in love and quickly invented space travel and flew to Venus. The Venusians welcomed the Martians with open arms. The love between the Venusians and Martians was magical. They delighted in being together, doing things together, and sharing together. Though from different worlds, they reveled in their differences. They spent months learning about each other, exploring and appreciating their different needs, preferences, and even behavior patterns. For years, they lived together in love and harmony. Then they decided to fly to Earth. In the beginning, everything was wonderful and beautiful, but the effects of Earth's atmosphere took hold. And one morning, everyone woke up with a peculiar kind of amnesia, selective amnesia. Both the Martians and Venusians forgot that they were from different planets and were supposed to be different. And one morning, everything they had learned about their differences was erased from their memory. And since that day, men and women have been in conflict. Without the awareness that we're supposed to be different, men and women are at odds with each other. We mistakenly assume that if our partners love us, they will react and behave in certain ways, the way we react when we love someone. Men mistakenly expect women to think, communicate, and react the way men do. Women mistakenly expect men to feel and communicate and respond the way women do. We've forgotten that men and women are supposed to be different. As a result, our relationships are filled with unnecessary friction and conflict. Clearly recognizing and respecting these differences dramatically reduces confusion when dealing with the opposite sex. When you remember that men are from Mars and women are from Venus, everything can be explained.
All right.
Falling in love is always magical. It feels
That sounds like the beginning of like a pickup line or something, right? Okay. So that's the premise of the book, right? That little introduction that I just played from you, that men and women have forgotten that they're different and those differences cause problems, right? So being aware of the differences and working through them is the key, right? And that book is all about that. And they talk about all these different, he talks about all these different things that tend to come up because men and women are so different in the way they communicate because they're from different places, right? And that's kind of the premise. So he talks about some of his things that women tend to struggle with the thing of listening versus offering advice. Really common like struggle in like heterosexual relationships or male female like communication patterns that women sometimes just want to be listened to and men want to fix it and offer advice, right? And that's a common struggle of like, I just want you to listen. Why are you providing all these solutions? And men being like, well, I want to fix it for you, right? But like, and the women being like, I just want to be heard. It's a very common like struggle. Men want to go to their caves, women want to talk. And men, when they're stressed out or upset or struggling, tend to want to be alone, and women tend to want to talk through it and how that can lead to issues in a relationship. One other big thing that men are like rubber bands, right? That they pull away for independence, but they can only go so far before they snap back and seek connection and intimacy. Women are more like waves that their moods rise and fall, and their interpretation of things tends to be determined by where they are on that road, right? If they're in a good place on the wave, they'll view things differently than if they're in a bad place on the wave. So a lot of, again, like very gendered stereotypes, but the whole book is about, you know, how can we use this knowledge to fix some of the problems that they sometimes lead to in relationships, right? I've hit the point with my partner where I often will be like, do you want me to just listen or do you want a solution, right? Because I tend to be like, very like, I can fix that for you, right? Like she'll have problems and like, I can fix that. I'm totally the like offer advice person, right? And sometimes she just wants to be listened to. So when she starts complaining, I'll be like, do you want me to just listen? Or do you want me to fix it, right? Sometimes she doesn't know, and then I try and fix it, and we'll see if I was right or not, right? But yeah, sometimes being aware of this is enough to help kind of deal with some of those issues. Now, to think about it a little more, I want you to get into like groups, like little groups, like 2, 3, 4 people, whatever is convenient. And I want you to think about what are some of the ways that men tend to communicate stereotypically, right? What do they maybe focus on? How do they communicate? What are some of the things that masculine communication tends to embody? And then how do women tend to communicate stereotypically? What do they tend to focus on? What are some of the things they might say or do? And then you can think about like how that could lead to issues. But it's like this here, you left the dishes in the living room, the garage is a mess, you never listen to my opinions, and half the time you don't even look at me when we talk. Gender translator, she says you didn't notice her haircut, right? Like, and so some of these communication patterns, I want you to think about for a moment, and then we'll talk about them together. So find like 2, 3, 4 people. What are some stereotypes for men, some stereotypes for women, communication based, and then we'll talk about it together. Write them down so you remember, so you can share.
There's only like 2 options. I want to know. I love it. But also like I just saw with yarn. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I think you guys want to do yeah. What I've noticed is they're very loving. That's right. That like there's like it's not just about how it makes you feel, it's just about what it is, right? Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's like yes, there's like emotion, but this is like the time I don't. You're like it doesn't work. Is there emotion is not happening. And then that a lot of times I'm very emotionally like how I feel. Yeah. And like why I feel this way. Yeah. I can figure it out. Yeah. But I feel like for men I have to distract out. Okay, so you gotta pride out of that. Like it's not like you're gonna be like, oh, you know, like I'm like we don't care about us. Yeah. Like that's not anger. And they do not
They just know, oh, I'm angry and I'm because, and they don't know why, and they have no ability to access the other emotions. It is healthy. Oh my God. Yeah, it's like, oh no, that my man, yeah, so, processing. He's trying. He does. He's trying. He doesn't know. Well, because societal standards say that.
Oh, they don't
Can't express
express.
emotions. But it's not that they don't cry, it's like they don't have emotion. They
Oh.
can't be sad. And so like, resorting to anger is one of societal pressures. So like they don't really know anything else to so anything that they don't know, they can't like forget. Yeah. They don't know.
I also think it's funny because I'm like, so like, another thing is too, like, whenever I get into an argument, whenever you get into a disagreement, they automatically think I'm arguing.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Agree on something.
I'm like, there's just like a little discussion and now you start arguing, now you're mad, like I'm not.
It's not upset, you're trying to have.
Literally, so I'm gonna say.
I'll give you a couple more minutes and we'll talk together.
It's a lot of meditation.
Yes.
Yes.
I think you have to spell it out. Is my understanding.
No,
you really have to like, if you're feeling upset because something, like you have to explain why you're feeling upset, or else I feel like they're not gonna get like they're not gonna understand. My personal. Like, and even then, they're gonna be like, well, maybe, and then like, it's try to explain the way out of it. There's so many women, I always like to say we're more than that. Say, okay, I'm upset because people say I was pretty sad, like that, whatever.
I feel like that kind of like
Another way.
like there's even
What is the water?
and then like and then saying and then it's like, so yeah, but you know, she's gonna want to take out him and she's not letting him, you know, we'll wait for like.
It's like 30 more seconds.
So she's gonna have a warning. And it says warning signs present that she may be going into the bed. Or when she needs like love. If she feels overwhelmed, she may say they're so insecure. It's like, I get worried. So what about?
Naturally.
Yeah.
Am I right? Like, how do you describe that?
What men and women naturally are born with when it comes to how they operate in society and social.
Well, I think these literally.
All right, let's get back to our big group so we can, I can't wait to hear what you came up with. We'll talk about it together. Let's start with women, right on, so let's, I don't know, I could, let's start with women. What are some of the stereotypical things or ways that women tend to communicate? What are some things that women do? Give me one. Anyone? Yeah.
I feel like women are quicker to cry than men.
Okay.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's like, I don't like, ow, I have to be kind of stoic. Like, you're allowed to show that you're upset, like.
Okay.
Which
So women may be more emotional, more willing to show the emotion.
in my opinion is more direct than just being shut off.
Sure.
At least you know you're upset, you know, the guy's just like, fine, shut up.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
I could be tripping, but I just kind of feel like women are naturally in relationships a little bit more anxious.
Okay,
And like they kind of like worry about everything, question
Sure.
everything, worry about other, like, the other person and like how they're feeling and like what kind of like, I guess, looking at the deeper like meanings, even if there are none. Does it
Mhm.
make sense? Like,
Yeah, right, looking for deeper meanings, kind of over interpreting. It reminds me of that, like, just give me a reason song, right? The whole thing, like, thing is like misinterpreting things that are totally normal, right? Yeah,
Kind of like going off of that, I feel like we're very detailed.
Okay.
And like everything we love details, and I feel like when you talk to the guy and he's someone that's very detailed and you're trying to like get more out of them, like, you know, what did you do? How was your day? And it's like, oh, I went here and there. But we're very like, oh, I went here and I saw this and then I did this, and then like we're just very like.
more detailed, more elaborate, the things you're sharing and describing. Okay, other stuff? Other things, other ways that women tend to communicate? Yeah,
I think we can almost all, I mean, I don't know, maybe, I think we're more emotionally in touch with our own feelings.
okay,
And so I think based on my experiences, like. I can always identify like why I'm upset or this, that, and third, but then it seems like with men, like, you gotta like drag it out of them, right? Like, they're not as much, like. They don't communicate that as well, you know, like being in touch with their emotions, you know?
okay, or at least not as willing to like, communicate it if they are in touch with them. Yeah,
I think it's stereotypical for women to be emotional when communicating with them. Because I feel like when it comes to the point where a woman has to sit you down and tell you directly what she's trying to tell you, she's been hinting at it this whole entire time.
Mhm.
So at this point, she's just frustrated. So yeah, she's gonna feel emotion. It's gonna come out. So yeah.
Alright, I'm laughing because I can think of these, I was thinking of examples of all these things that you're saying, right? Okay, so like been hinting at it, and it's like, okay, now I'm gonna just tell it. Because you're frustrated. Other thoughts? What else? Yeah,
You're kind of going off her, I think that as women, we think we think that they know what we want.
okay,
And like what is our expectations, and I think our expectations and their expectations are different.
sure.
And so as women, I think we just assume that they know, and it could be like ignorance, it could be just whatever it is, but like. We just think that they should know. Sometimes they really don't know. And so, yeah, I think that's like the way we communicate is a little different there.
Sure, sure. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I feel like that would be kind of like an example of like in the sense of how we're very emotional about like. I don't mean emotional also like to clarify like emotional like we're gonna start bawling our eyes out, but just more emotional as in like we know like am I angry right now? Am
Okay.
I like
Or emotional
frustrated?
intelligence.
Yes, but I think like kind of with that going off of that, like. We think like, you know, isn't it obvious to not see my haircut, but they're not really thinking that, like, they're kind of more surface level with it. And I feel like that's where the clash comes, is like, we're always just assuming that they're thinking as emotional as we are, but they're kind of more, I feel like.
At the
nonchalant.
surface.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. I think it's a good description. Other thoughts? Anything else over here? Yeah?
Trying to talk to guys, like, I don't know, like, I've seen a lot of women look at lakes. But then there's obviously like, wouldn't talk to them more, or there are the like out, I don't wanna call them outliers, but like,
Sure.
I guess just exceptions, yeah, exceptions, it's like, it's not like everything's. But I don't know, like, my dad is kind of like the exception, he's like the most emotional. So like, in comparison to like, I don't know, like my experience, it's just like, you have to like pry it out of them, and it can be almost, and it could be like a simple question, because you have to be like complicated.
Yeah, and like, and again, these are stereotypes, right? So there's always gonna be people who are flipped. And people who are the exception and they don't like meet with, like the stereotypes don't fit. That happens a lot, actually. We are so stereotyped, but it's often not always the case. Right? Yeah, I think you're.
Then he tries to complicate, and then kind of just, really quick in her head.
Okay,
This sort of feeling, I don't know about this, sorry, they're like, to make you feel better.
okay,
You know, and then better just like. Take it back.
all right,
They're like, this is kind of circulating, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
You know, but you know, it would be helpful to those of you who have girlfriends. Tell your girlfriend that you need some time to think about it. And
Okay.
reassure them, because good lord, you know, that you're just causing overthinking, and you're just like, you're really just stressed out something. Tell your girlfriend you're stressed and you need some time.
Okay, so you need some time to think about it. Nothing wrong with taking time to think about things, yeah.
I think the stereotype goes a lot into societal pressures on typical men, you know, they're a lot of the time grown up with, oh, you know, macho men can't, you know, cry, can't have emotions, can't.
Yeah.
feel. So, you know, that's why it's all left for the women or, you know,
Sure.
whatever they say, and so like. For, you know, women to be more emotional, because it's societally or socially acceptable for that to
Yeah.
be something. And it's not as socially acceptable for men to be, you know, emotional and everything. It seems as though women are overly emotional because the men aren't allowed to show their emotions, so it just seems like they're overly, but that's pretty much just kind of how it should be, just be able to express their emotions.
Yeah.
But men being more closed off because of that, they kind of resort to anger a lot of the time in conversations because they weren't allowed to process those emotions and they were supposed to shut, or, you know,
Yeah.
commonly. Little boys are supposed to, you know, turn them off because, you know, we're not supposed to have emotions and everything like that. So that's why I feel like men are more closed off and they do need that time to, you know, sit and think because they weren't allowed to do that. They were just, you know, supposed to have a reaction.
Yeah, supposed to know the answer right away.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and a lot of those like gender constructions and gender norms play into this, right? I always think of with this one, with how women tend to communicate stereotypically. So I'm grateful my partner's not a game player at all, which is good because I don't pick up things like obviously, and that would be a problem, right? But luckily, it's not usually the case, except one thing, that she always gives me the most indirect messages when it comes to dinner. And it drives me nuts, and it's a fight that we've had for 21 years, like a little one, right? But it would go like this, and this happened yesterday, it happens every week, right? You think we figured this out at this point. But yesterday, I was like, where do you want to go to dinner? That's my question. Her response, anywhere's fine. I know right there I'm screwed. Completely screwed, right? I'm like, let's just let the kids pick then, like, that's my response when she says anywhere is fine. Like, all right, kids, where do you want to go? Because this isn't gonna happen, right? So anywhere's fine, like, great, let's go to Don Kuko's. Anywhere was fine, that's my choice, let's go. I solved it, let's go. I'm not really in the mood for next food. Okay, in my head, I'm like, so everyone is not fine, right? Like in my mind, right? I'm not that mean, right? So I was like, okay, how about pizza? I really like pizza. Right, I was sitting there, okay, McDonald's, fast food, no, I'd rather sit down somewhere. Okay, how about Reds? I will like put out there like 12 options and find out like, where do you want to go? I'm like, because I've given you everywhere that I could think to go. She's like, I don't know, anywhere's fine. Like, but it's not. I just gave you this one, this one, this one, this one. Kids, where are we going? Like, I mean, and it happens over and over and over again that anywhere is fine. That's like that's mine with this one. But I'm guilty of things as well, but that's hers. Every time I'm like, it's clearly not. And we were like on the John Cooper, right? Yeah.
Sometimes learning that we get like it's not like wasn't that like what did I ask?
Sure.
But then I think when sometimes don't make it for us, they're just going to be
Okay.
sometimes it's back. What you're trying to do.
Okay, like big picture, cause and effect everything versus when you see immediacy. Did you have?
I was gonna say, I saw a TikTok of that, and then I was like, what you should do, like, if you ever come across that issue, is you tell the person, oh my god, guess where I'm gonna take you to eat today, it's your favorite place, and usually they're gonna be like, oh my god, and then that's where you take them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll try that next time.
Yeah, second thing I was gonna say, like, kind of.
But then it's like, you didn't know my favorite place if you don't guess it, right? It's not going bad, but anyway, go ahead.
I feel like we're very, like, it's the principle of the situation, not
Mhm.
really like the situation itself. And I feel like that we're very, like, the big picture of it on, they're kind of just like,
Sure.
you know, it's just, like, it's that big of a deal. But we already have like a list behind your hand, we're like, oh, but.
Right, all the other stuff there, right? Interesting, okay, yeah.
This is kind of going back to like the idea of men needing to be stoic, which I feel that there's already something logically wrong with that. because
Sure.
A lot of like alpha males like saying like like, oh, like you're not supposed to cry, and it's like they're kind of implying themselves that like they've never cried in their life, and I don't know how that's humanly possible.
Sure.
That you've never cried before in your life, so just to apply that to other people, it's like, if you think about it, it just doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. Yeah.
But society sense.
Yeah. We are all emotional beings, right? But what is allowed for who is different, right? It's one's more acceptable than the other. Now, I have an example for each of these. So I have one for women, and then we'll go and we'll talk about men. The one for women is much shorter, but like how to talk to women, what women focus on in their communication. So let me play this for you. This one's from 40-Year-Old Virgin. Lots of romantic comedies focusing on as well. Most awkward conversation ever, I think, but some of those stereotypes. And I have one for men that's a little longer that we'll get to in a minute. But let's talk about men then. Like, how do men tend to communicate stereotypically? What are some of the things that men do? Let's pick on the other side for a little bit here. What are some of the things for men? Yeah.
I feel like they think more logically,
Okay.
so like, instead of more emotionally, they're more like, I think what she was saying, right, like, not like surface level, right, like just.
Okay.
You know, you shouldn't be upset about this because da 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 da, when it's, for us, it's more of a deeper meaning behind it, most of the time.
Okay. Surface level, logical. Yeah.
I really like women focus on communication and men focus on knowledge, because anytime I'm talking to a man, especially in a professional setting, he's always trying to like prove his knowledge.
Sure.
Or like mansplain and he's looking at that.
Yeah, and I think it's a really common one. It's a really common stereotype, and it definitely happens, right? They can happen on either side, but stereotypically, great example. Other people, what else? What else for men? I tend to communicate more like stereotypically male, but I'm a very like thoughtful, mindful, emotional person at the same time. So I kind of blend the two. But one that I'm always guilty of is speaking without thinking. Like I put my foot in my mouth a lot. I mean, I share random things with you without thinking about it, right? And so I'm coaching 2 teams, and our goalie had 2 goalies on the soccer team. One of them wasn't going to be there, and the other was sick, and was like, I might not be at the game. And my response, I thought in my head, was just fine, and apparently it was not. And I tried to delete it, and it wouldn't let me delete it off the app. You could see that I deleted it, right? Which was even more embarrassing. But I said something in my mind that sounded, I was like, well, I'm glad you stayed home because I need her to be there Saturday because we don't have another goalie. Like, logically, was like, I need a goalie for the game. And my partner was like, that was so insensitive, delete it now. I was like, oh, okay. And I went and deleted it. And I was like, okay, tell me what I should have said. And I wrote that. Now I'm no longer allowed to post on these apps unless I check it with my partner first. I didn't think it was that bad. Apparently I worded it in a way that was completely insensitive. I pride myself on being relatively sensitive, but I'm now no longer allowed to post on my team apps until I have checked my post with my wife first. Yeah.
I feel that oftentimes, I mean, I guess this could apply to anyone, but there's often like this, like society accepts when like men are controlling of women, and like, I'm thinking of this one celebrity or something, I forget who, but he was like, oh, these are just my boundaries for my dating, but it's like giving his girlfriend permission to do basic things that like really he shouldn't be in control of. Like I don't think it was specifically Andrew Tate, but that does seem like something you would do.
Right, okay. Interesting, yeah, and I can see that. I think that's a common one, right? Of like, it's that asserting in a way, right? And the boundaries that come with it. And I'm giving you permission to do X when it's not really your permission to give. Yeah.
2 things. When you were talking about the whole soccer thing, do you think that's more of a like feminine masculine thing? Because I kind of find myself always saying stuff without really like thinking too much into it, and then later on, and like when I'm in my bed sleeping, I'm like, why did I say that? And that could be in any situation.
Right.
I'm just an overthinker, to be fair, but
Same.
so I wonder if it's more so just like about like you're like, I don't even know, just I don't know.
So it could be
Personality.
gendered or it could be personality.
You know, because like I don't know. I feel like I don't see a lot of men like blurting things out that they wouldn't want.
That's not necessarily true. They just get away with saying insensitive things more because they're not supposed to.
You know what, that might be fair, that might be true,
But it could be personality or it could be gender. Like here we're talking about gender, but it could just be a personality trait, right?
Yeah.
You know, as well. Other things for men? Anything else? We'll go way back in the open here. Yeah.
I'm really sick. He tends to do this thing where it's like he repeats and you acts the way, so that's kind of stereotypical, but I find it really true that a lot of men do that. And I also feel like there's this fear of if I'm emotional, she's not gonna think I'm a man anymore. She's not gonna love me as much, and she's not gonna find me as attractive. And I tell them all the time, I'm like, you can talk about how you're feeling. I'm not gonna paint you in a certain way, right? It's just
Sure.
a lot of them are just convinced that it's a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, to an extent, it might be, but overall, just like things about how you're feeling, like you had a rough day or something really awful happened and you need to cry, like that's okay.
Yeah.
You're allowed to, like nobody's gonna keep you home. And I know it's been kind of a struggle for us because I just want to help them. And it's just like, no, I need help.
Sure. I can do it myself. I can shoulder
Yeah.
that. I don't need to.
We're not a life preserver, like.
And some of that is that gender construction and it has to be family of origin, like sometimes the family style that you grow up in with communication can play a big role too. But yeah, like that's a very typical gendered male, female struggle. Like you're allowed to show those emotions. You have one too.
Yeah, it's similar to that. It's just like I've seen like the same pattern, like every single man I've ever like surrounded myself with is that like when there's any bit of emotion, when they have to like think internally about something, when something they feel mad, bad, or like again, something internal, they always have to step away.
Sure.
And that may come off defensive to a lot of people because it's like all of a sudden you're just like leaving the situation, leaving the area, and you're like, oh, like what did I do? But it's more like internal for them. And I remember a story that my mom said very nonchalantly this one time about my dad, is that like when I have an older sister, when she was first born, which is basically like the first kid, right? They had an argument, not over the kid, but over something else. And my dad just left for the night. And my mom was like, what's going on? Give him his space, right? And then the next day she like called him up and was like, are you ready to like come back home? He was like, yeah. Then he came back. But it's like, that's like so excessive to just completely leave and like not tell like your wife and your newborn kid where you're at.
Sure.
And it's like, if you just communicated, if you just took a second to just say like, give me a little bit of space instead of just leaving. And like,
that's
who knew,
extreme.
like, it's very extreme.
Sure.
And it's like, who knew if you were even gonna come back? And you know, my dad says to me, he's like, you should be happy that you have a dad, because a lot of people don't have dads.
Oh.
Dude, you left. Like, what are you talking
Like,
about?
you're setting the low bar there.
Yeah.
Interesting, yeah, and it's that whole like men retreat, right? And it's interesting, that's the one that's different in my relationship. Like, I'm so like, I want no space. I'm a like no space person. Like, I'm like that Velcro. I'm like, and I can own that. And my partner, when she's upset, is like, I need space. And that took us like 15 years to figure out together. Because too much space freaks me out. And space for her is like crucial. So I'm like, I'll give you space like in our house in the living room, and I won't come bother you, but please don't leave, right? Like, it's interesting, like the space one is one that a lot of people can have a hard time with, right? Especially if someone leaves and it's kind of the extreme space. Yeah.
I think one thing that I've seen a lot with men, it's like when you're trying to get them to see your point of view.
Next time. But the idea, right, is that again, that men and women tend to communicate very, very differently, stereotypically. The other one's the ugly truth. And it's such a great example. So I'm not going to give up on it, but I'll give up on it just for the moment, right? So we'll move on then and talk a little bit more about like sexual communication. So obviously we've been talking about like gendered communication and differences there. Really interesting, like when you look at like all these different things related to communication and relationships, There's this thing called the onion theory of communication. And I always think of like Donkey from Shrek, that you reveal yourself in layers to people, like layers of an onion. When you meet someone for the first time, you're on the surface. It's very like superficial stuff. And as you get to know them, you move in layers, right? And if you do this too quickly, it's a problem. If you don't do this quick enough, it's a problem, right? If you reveal too much right off the bat, it can scare someone away. If you don't reveal enough, it could also scare them away that you're too closed off. So it's kind of like this balancing act of increasing intimacy in layers as you get to know someone. And this is true even in friendships as well, right? If they don't reveal enough to you or kind of let you in, it can feel like they don't care, right? Same with relationships. There's also this other piece here of discussing your sexual history and sexual preferences with a partner. And this is something that people notoriously don't want to do. I don't want to hear about your sexual past. I don't want to hear about previous partners that you've had and whatnot, but it's a little bit important. If you don't have conversations with a partner about what you like and what you don't like, then you're operating on guesswork and past experience that might not be relevant to the person that you're with. Okay, so maybe you were with somebody for years who didn't like one thing, and now you have a new partner who really likes that, but you assume they don't because of the last person you were with. Right, so finding ways to make requests, tell people what you like and what you don't like. And we're talking like sexually here, right? Having a little bit of self-disclosure, those things can be really important to the success of like your physical intimacy with each other, in addition to the emotional intimacy that we've been talking about through what you say and how you communicate. There's a great example of this in the movie I Love You, Man, related to oral sex. And so it looked like it was working. I'm gonna try. I am a very persistent person. I will keep trying. I have, right? He has that like grimace at one point when she's talking about her ex. And I feel like that sums up how people feel about a conversation like this. That like, oh, I don't want to hear about it, right? Like, please don't tell me. And as much as that is like a valid response, if you don't talk about these things, then you don't know. Like it's caused issues in their relationship for years. They're about to get married. And like it comes up and now it's like, oh, well, that was him, not you. Let's fix that, right? Like, and so interesting and difficult, but important, right? And so having conversations not only about like feelings and emotions, but also about like your sexual preferences with a partner is important if you want to have a successful like sex life with them. Right? So uncomfortable, but important. And I think that's a great example of that. Not at a dinner with family, right? But privately at home with your partner. Right, yeah, you don't want to bring your parents into that. One other thing in this chapter, there are two other very famous kind of couples psychologists that are very famous for their knowledge and research on communication. And it's a husband and wife team named Gottman and Gottman, right? And so when I was training to be a therapist, there was this whole course that we had to take by them on couple communication patterns and unsuccessful patterns of communication in relationships. Now, Gottman and Gottman interviewed so many people and have done so much work on this topic that they said they could predict with 99% accuracy when a relationship would fail based off of a 10-minute interview with a couple, right? And they did it over and over and over again. And what they said their indicators were, there were 4 indicators that said that a couple was doomed to fail and break up if they didn't fix them. So if you have some of these, you just have to address them, right? Was there like kind of takeaway. So according to them, criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling were their 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The horsemen of the apocalypse bring about the beginning of the end. These are the beginning of the end of a relationship if not addressed, according to Gottman and Gottman. So one is criticism, attacking your partner's personality or character, right? So rather than like, the situation, you always do this. You never do that. Huge generalizations attacking their personality or character rather than like, hey, you didn't do this today, or this didn't happen right now, right? Instead of saying, you never give me X, I really need X. You see how different those two things can be? You don't do this versus I need this, right? So taking that responsibility off was a big thing that they focused on. Criticism, right? Always pointing out like character flaws and generalizations. Contempt is when you insult or intend to harm a partner, right? So you're attacking them in a way. He considered rolling your eyes or sneering a form of contempt, right? So when you roll your eyes at a partner, not in a playful way, but in a contemptuous way, you view that as a really, really negative sign that you are kind of attacking their sense of self-worth, or you're intending to harm them physically or emotionally, that's a big red flag. Defensiveness, always seeing yourself as the victim, that could be a huge problem. You're not able to take the other person's perspective. You see yourself as being wronged and the victim every time, and you can't see the other side of the coin. That was another one. And then finally, stonewalling, removing yourself from the relationship to avoid conflict. So whether that's literally leaving or just blocking someone out. When you stonewall someone, it's like you refuse to talk to them, you're blank, you're shut off. It's that if you do these 4 things consistently in a relationship, it's going to end up ruining the relationship down the line. Maybe not immediately, but that if they weren't addressed, these would bring about the beginning of the end. Really, really like famous like couples duo that have been together a long time and been practicing couples therapy a long time as well. I like the one on the bottom. Looks like she's about to eat him, right? Like, I don't know what's happening there, but it's not going well, right? So again, if you have these patterns, they need to be addressed and try to learn a better way. Other questions, thoughts, like other examples, stories, comments, anything before we move on from this chapter? Anything else here? All right. So the next chapter that we're going to look at, we still have a few minutes, so let's get like 1 or 2 slides in and then we'll stop. Just since I did miss that one last week, I don't want to fall behind. So the next chapter that we're going to look at is love and intimacy. So we're kind of building on those topics, which is why I put them in this order. So let's just get like just 1 slide or 2 in here, and then we'll move on. So the idea in this chapter is we're going to look at different types of love. Right, falling in love with who and like why and with whom, issues in relationships, maintaining relationship satisfaction. So we'll look a lot at relationships and falling in love. And there's a lot of like chemistry involved in falling in love, a lot of biological stuff that happens, and then stuff that happens that, like, if we're aware of, can make a big difference. When we fall in love with someone in the first months, it's very biological, chemical. You feel a lot of chemicals going through your system, like neurotransmitters and hormones, and they tend to fall off at certain points in relationships. And if you're aware of that, it can help you push through those times. So it's something that's really interesting that we'll talk about. And I had some images of people who looked like they were in love. I just did a Google search of love, which is way less dangerous than some of the other Google searches I've done for this class. Like they all look happy, nothing aggressive. And so what we'll do next time is we'll talk a little bit about like, how do we define love? I have a little love montage from some movies that I'll play to help get you in the mood of love, right, if we can. And then we'll talk about some of these different things. I have a little love inventory that I also want to give you. It'll look at different types of love and which type of love you tend to have in your life and in your relationships. So that's what we'll cover on Wednesday. We'll get into all of that. I just wanted to introduce it. But I have that little montage and I want to be able to play that for you. I think it'll take us, I don't want to go over it. So I guess I'll stop there rather than play it. But we'll pick up here when I see you on Wednesday. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Yeah, what's up?
So we're gonna talk about the different types of love. Are you
Yeah.
talking about like those like
So there's like these, like the passionate,
yes, yeah, that's
companionate,
what I was gonna
and then the
okay,
colors
the
of them, too.
triangle, yeah. I remember learning about this in my social psychology last semester.
Yeah.
That's why I was like, is that what
Lots
we're
of
gonna